All right, today we're jumping into a real theological classic, The Attributes of God by Arthur W. Pink. Our goal here is to really get to the heart of this dense but fascinating book, which lays out a vision of God that's, well, it's both awe-inspiring and, for a lot of people, pretty challenging.
Pink kicks things off with this absolute bombshell of a quote from Martin Luther. This one line just completely sets the stage, right? It's suggesting that our default setting, the way we naturally think about God, is fundamentally off base, shaped too much by our own tiny human perspective. And Pink's entire book is an effort to fix that.
And that leads us to the big question for our whole explainer. If our thoughts are too human, then how in the world should we be thinking about God? Pink's work tries to answer that by going back to the source and systematically laying out what the scriptures actually say about who God is at his core. So, first up, the God who is unknown. Pink starts with this pretty radical idea: you can't just think your way to knowing God. He says a real spiritual knowledge has to be revealed. It's got to go way beyond just head knowledge and become something that completely transforms you.
He makes this bold claim that the God most people talk about today is frankly a watered-down version, a sort of figment of our imagination that we're more comfortable with. But the God of the Bible? Whoa. Pink says he's solitary, supreme, and operates on a level that's almost completely alien to how we experience the world.
And that brings us to the absolute foundation of Pink's whole argument: God's complete and total solitariness. You know, this is a real game changer for how you think about creation and God's relationship to it. Let's really wrap our heads around this. We're talking about God existing before everything, before time, before space, before the angels. God was just alone. And the key part? He was totally fine with it. Self-sufficient, perfectly happy, needed absolutely nothing. So, and this is so crucial, creation wasn't born out of some divine loneliness or need. According to Pink, it added nothing essential to God's being. The act of creating the universe was a totally free choice, something he did just to put his own glory on display. And wow, this verse from Isaiah just drives that home, doesn't it? It puts things in perspective. In this view, all of human history, all of our empires, our achievements, they're less than a single drop of water in a bucket compared to the immense, self-sufficient reality of God. Okay, so if God is totally supreme and self-sufficient, what's the next logical step? Well, for Pink, it means he has to have a plan, an eternal, unchanging plan, and these are what he calls the divine decrees.
So what's a decree? Pink's not talking about a bunch of different decisions God makes along the way. Nope, he's talking about one single massive purpose that God came up with in eternity. It's this one huge thought from an infinite mind that covers, well, literally everything that will ever happen.
And Pink says these decrees have 4 key properties. First, they're eternal, meaning God isn't winging it, right? Second, they're wise. It's the best plan possible. Third, they're free. Nothing forced his hand. And finally, and this is a big one, they're absolute and unconditional. They're going to happen no matter what we do.
And this verse from Isaiah is basically the mic drop for that idea. My counsel shall stand. End of story. For Pink, this means nothing can ultimately get in the way of God's purpose. All right, so we've got this supreme God with a plan that cannot fail. So the next question is, what's the character of this God? And how does he pull it all off? For Pink, it comes down to 2 big things: perfect holiness and infinite power. Pink has this beautiful way of describing holiness. He calls it God's beauty. It's not just another item on a list of attributes. It's the thing that makes everything else beautiful. His power is a holy power. His wisdom is a holy wisdom. It means he is completely, totally pure and has a deep, settled hatred of anything that isn't. And right alongside that holiness is his omnipotence, his infinite power. And this power isn't something he gets from somewhere else. It's just part of who he is. It's the raw ability to do whatever he wants, and it costs him nothing. To help us get our heads around this kind of mind-bending power, Pink points to these incredible stories from the Bible: parting the Red Sea, making the sun stop. This isn't just a magic show. These are moments that prove God's will is the most real thing in the universe, more real even than the laws of physics. Now I know what you might be thinking. This picture of God, all-powerful, perfectly holy, totally supreme, it can feel a little intimidating, a little distant maybe. So how does a God like that even interact with messy, flawed people like us? Well, Pink says the answer is in two very specific attributes: grace and mercy.
And this is where Pink gets super precise, because he says grace and mercy are not the same thing. Mercy is God's pity for people who are miserable. You could call it a general kindness he shows to creation. But grace? Oh, that's different. That's God's totally unearned, completely sovereign favor that he shows only to the guilty people he has specifically chosen to save. You can't earn it, you can't buy it.
And he grounds this whole idea right here in Scripture. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious. For Pink, this is crystal clear. God is not obligated to show grace or mercy to anyone. It's his call and his alone.
And that brings us to the bottom line of Pink's whole argument. This is where it all lands, and where it gets really, really personal. Because this view of God, this unchangeable being, leads to two totally different outcomes.
So check this out. For the believer, this unchanging, sovereign God is the greatest comfort imaginable. Why? Because your salvation doesn't depend on you and your good days or bad days. It rests on God's unshakable plan. It's secure. But for the unbeliever, that same unchangeableness is terrifying. Because if God is unchangeably holy and his word is true, then his promises of judgment are just as certain as his promises of salvation.
So we end up right back where we started, with a pretty intense idea. Pink gives us a God who is absolutely consistent, whose will is always done. And the question he leaves hanging in the air is for you. Does the idea of a God who never, ever changes, does that bring you a deep sense of peace or a profound sense of unease?